Okay, hello. I'm glad you have come also to my talk, that you have not gone away yet. So I'm going to be talking about navigation in Flutter, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and also the kind of not so obvious parts of it. So I'm Matt, hello, and I'm a Flutter developer at LeanCode and also founder at ResoCoder, the education platform for Flutter developers, which has been kind of inactive, but coming back to it lately. And so let's start with navigation, right? Every app needs to navigate because you probably don't have just one screen inside of your app. You have multiple screens, and there are also multiple ways how you can navigate to those screens, to those routes. So in this talk, we're going to go over the options you have available, both with Navigator 1.0 and also Navigator so-called 2.0, so with the router. And you will hopefully learn some new things that you were not even thinking about, which are not so obvious, as is the name of the talk, about each and every of those solutions you can use to navigate around your app. So the very first, very unexciting is the basic imperative navigation. So that's the Navigator 1.0, absolute the basics. You just have the home route in your material app. Let's say it's a home screen. And then, of course, to navigate in the home screen, we have Navigator off, context push. So that's the most basic imperative navigation. Imperative because you tell it what to do as opposed to declarative. We're going to get there later, but this is fully imperative, very basic. Then in the second screen to which you can navigate, you have Navigator of context pop. And this is what kind of happens. So yeah, I mean, nothing fancy. And you can see that we are running on the web, and the address bar is not updating. Not very surprising because we are not even using named routes. So this approach is useful for simple apps, but for anything more than just maybe very quick proof of concept or some little small app, it's not great. So next up, we have still with Navigator 1.0, the named imperative navigation using the ungenerated route. So we already see some sort of like names, so slash and slash second. Again, very basic. And it's named. So to navigate, we say push named instead of just push. And also we have all of the material page routes centralized. We don't need to like flood our code base with that kind of stuff. So we now only deal with names with the slash second here. So this provides the same exact output as the last one. We don't have any updates of the address bar. There is no path, no location that's being changed in the address bar. It's still just localhost and then the port. Nothing changes there. So, I mean, you have the benefits of having a simplified code base, in my opinion, because you are not putting those material page routes or Cupertino routes everywhere throughout your code, but you aren't getting much more from this approach as opposed to the previous one. And now we're getting to another kind of named imperative navigation, and that's with the routes in the material app. So now we don't have the onGenerate routes callback, but we have the routes map. The downside of this approach is that you cannot pass anything to those routes when you navigate. There is no way to pass in an argument. Previously there was, because those settings, of course, take an argument and you can get it from there. But here, just no way to pass anything into these routes. But what's better with this approach is that even though we are using the imperative navigator, what's now happening is that we have this address bar actually changing on the web. So we can see in which route we are located. And when I type in second, we navigate to the second route. So we can navigate by typing into the address bar and hitting enter. So that's much better, but you will see that this is not really such a huge win, but still, for simple apps, you don't want to deal with Navigator 2.0, with, for example, Go Router or some other package like AutoRoute. It might just be enough. You don't need to always go with the router, the newer approach. So maybe this is perfectly fine for your use case, for your medium-sized app, let's say, that doesn't need deep links everywhere. The next approach, or kind of the same approach, but with more widely opened eyes, when we look at this code, we realize that the Navigator 1.0 also kind of supports deep links. It supports deep links in a very crude fashion. If you are using deep links with the Navigator 2.0, this is going to seem like it's almost a joke because it doesn't work intuitively, especially on the web. But still, it allows for deep linking. So basically, what happens here is that the initial route acts as a deep link. And what's going to happen is that we open up at the second route and we can go back to the first route. So that's what happens when you just run the app, which is set up like this. So you open up the second route and you can press the back button, navigate back in the browser, and you're going to end up at the home screen. So it supports kind of a deep linking, but it's not very intuitive because usually in web apps and websites, let's say YouTube has sort of its main homepage where you have your feed, and then you have pages for separate videos that you want to watch, right? And when you open up as the first thing in a tab, imagine you open a new tab watching a YouTube video, and that's a new tab. You cannot hit back and go to the home screen of YouTube. You cannot go to your feed like this because the first page you opened up on the new Google Chrome tab was that specific video. And this works exactly the opposite way. Even though the second route was opened first, you still can navigate back. But there is no history according to which you should be able to navigate back. It's just a weird Flutter thing, which we will get rid of once we look into the Navigator 2.0. But nevertheless, it still works, kind of all right. And when we add a third route, which is sort of like nested, in quotation marks, nested, within the first and the second route, so we're going to have /2/3. This third route is set up as the initial route, as you can see. So when we run the app, we're going to be here. We can navigate back using the browser buttons, even though, again, it doesn't really make much sense from the usual way that web apps exist. And we also see a lot of weirdness that when we go to home screen, we can now press the forward and backward, and forward and backward doesn't do anything. It's very weird. It's like, it's not a good user experience for the user of this web app that's built in Flutter, because these back and forward browser buttons should not be working like this. They basically sometimes work, sometimes don't. it's hard to say when they break, but at some point, once they break, they will no longer work. Not so great. So that's when declarative navigation using GoRouter, but you have also other packages like the AutoRoute and also some others, but they are much less popular. And of course, GoRouter is now officially supported by the Flutter team and Google, so it's the go-to solution. So we're using GoRouter, and a lot of code here, but basically what we're doing here is that we are naively just taking how the routes were set up on the last slide with the Navigator 1.0 and the routes map, and we are naively just porting it over to work with GoRouter. So we are using material app.router, also the GoRouter. The initial location is same as previously, so /2/3. And we just have very naively ported those routes from the route map into Go routes. So again, we have on the same level, they are not nested in any way. They're just like top level routes. We have just / for the home, /2 for the second screen, and /2/3 for the third screen. And now to properly navigate with GoRouter, instead of push, we say context.go, and we specify the precise location where we want to actually navigate to. And also in the back button, so go back to home screen all the way down here, we don't say context.pop, but we say context.go and just / to go back to the home screen. We're gonna see that we can actually use pop with GoRouter as well, but for now, we have completely removed any kind of push and pop from our code base. We are just using the go method. And we start off at the third screen, and you can see that we have no like back buttons on the app bar. They are not there at all, but the browser history works, so we can now for the first time actually go forward using the browser button, which does not work at all with Navigator 1.0, so this is a huge plus. The browser history works as expected. Even though we are in the third screen, we cannot navigate back right from the get-go because we have not opened those pages ourselves. So this is much better, much more native browser experience. But yeah, we don't have the back buttons in the app bars because previously they were there. Now they are not there. So what's up with that? Well, the problem is that we have implemented or ported these routes from the Navigator 1.0 to the GoRouter very naively. With GoRouter, we need to think more about nesting. And since it's a declarative navigator, we need to declare everything properly beforehand so that once our app is running, it's running as we expect it to be running. So with GoRouter, we cannot just have this in a flat hierarchy. We actually need to nest these routes. So we're going to create child routes. And how are we creating child routes? Well, we know that from the home screen, we can navigate to the second screen. Therefore, the second screen should be a child of the home screen, of its route, of course. So we do that. And then from the second screen, we can navigate to the third screen. So obviously, the third screen should be a child of the second route. And with this kind of a nested approach, the Flutter app will now know that from the third screen you can navigate back to the second screen, and from that back to the home screen. And it will add those back buttons automatically to the app bar, just like you were used to previously. But as opposed to Navigator 1.0 approach, yes, we have the back buttons on the app bar, but also the browser history works as you would expect it to work. So we really have the best of both worlds. And the only downside to this is that you need to be thinking more about how to declare your routes. This is a very simple example, but in a more complex app, it really takes some thought process and planning things out. But for complex apps, it's very useful. Again, for simple apps, I don't think you necessarily need to use Navigator 2.0, but you of course can. But you should definitely like pick and choose what works for you. So I would advise against like always like having one paradigm in mind and then pushing it on every kind of app. If you're building a personal small app, it's different than building a huge enterprise app, of course. And we can also pop as usual now. Previously, if we tried to pop with the flat hierarchy, it would not work. But now, since we have child routes, it's a nested hierarchy, we can pop just fine. That's also why the back buttons appear in the app bars. And just to finish things off, we can also work with path and query parameters with GoRouter. So for the second route, we're going to have a path parameter. And for the third route, we're going to have a query parameter. So path parameter, of course, goes into the path. It's a part of the path. And query parameter is after the question mark in the URL. So we have a path parameter ID for the second route and query parameter text for the third route. Let's see how it works. So when we want to navigate, we need to include the ID in the path. The same goes for the query parameter. So we can now navigate just fine. We can also modify the URL directly in the address bar. The text has changed. Everything is nice. We can change the path parameter to be 3 and ID changes back to 3. You could see that the browser history works just fine. We can go back. But what is going to happen if you sort of try to navigate to the third route without providing a path parameter for the second route? What do you think is going to happen if you have /second and /third right after? Well, you're not going to navigate to the third route, but GoRouter is going to think that /second/third, you're referring that the third is a path parameter, and that's a string, but it should be an integer because that path parameter is for an ID, as you can see. So what's going to happen at first, this works, but when I say /second/third, we're going to get a format exception because we're trying to cast a string into an integer, but that doesn't work, or parse. So how we can mitigate that is with another feature which is offered by GoRouter, and that is redirection. So in this case, we're going to detect if perhaps less skilled user like me of the app is not perhaps trying to navigate to the third route, but sort of incorrectly by going directly and saying /2/3 without providing any of the path parameter in between. And if user is trying to do that, we're just going to say, okay, user, I know what you're trying to do, so I'm going to redirect you to /2/1/3. So we're gonna see the third route properly. So now with this code change, what's gonna happen? Well, this is before the code change. Now I will hot reload the app with the proper code in place. Now when I try to do the same thing, it redirects me to the proper location. And redirection is very nice to use in GoRouter. So what's the moral of the story? What's the point of this short talk? Well, we have gone over many different approaches. In the Navigator 1.0, there are very many approaches to do the sort of the same thing. You have the on-generate route. You, of course, have directly pushed routes. You have the routes map. Then we go to the declarative navigation with GoRouter. So there are many approaches to do the same thing. And sort of my opinion on all this is that you should know all about navigation on Navigator 1.0, Navigator 2.0, different approaches to all things. And once you know, sort of have a working knowledge of every approach you can take, then you can pick and choose which parts you will use in your app which you are building. Because you are building an app, you have your own preferences, your team has their own preferences, and the scope of the app is always different. And based on your knowledge, you should always be able to choose the right solution. So again, for a small app, you maybe don't need to even go with Navigator 2.0. And you can just use Navigator 1.0 with different combinations of on-generate route and with the routes map. That's perfectly fine. Even with GoRouter, sometime you can say context.go and always meticulously specify the location. But sometimes even with the GoRouter, you can just push a route, which creates a so-called pageless route. You can use both approaches always. So you can always just pick and choose what fits you, your preferences, and your project best. Thank you.
All right. Thanks for the talk. Are there any questions? Okay, we can start with you, Dominic, again.
Thanks, Matej, for the really good overview. I know I'm getting boring here, but I will have two questions this time. The first one is about, because I don't really use Flutter web, I'd rather use it on the mobile. And I was wondering if GoRouter, which was the bulk of the presentation, does the route definition supports universal and app links? So if you have, let's say, a link in a Google search, does this support it out of the box?
Yes, it does support it when you configure Android or iOS for deep links. So it is supported.
Great. And the second one is like, if you have a nested route, let's say 3 pages in, does it mean that it will build all the parents, all the ancestors of the route that you navigate to? Let's say if you navigate directly to the third route in your example, is the home page and the second route and the third page built at the same time?
I have not been thinking about this that much, but when I think about it now, it should be, because we are just popping those routes. So, and if you can pop a route, that means that there is something before it. So yes, it should be creating those. Yeah. But that's right. The interesting thing is that you can actually navigate back like this when you have a nested route situation. You can navigate back with the back button in the app bar, but you cannot navigate back with the browser back button, because the browser respects the browser history, and the in-app back button on the app bar is just trying to always find if, hey, can I pop the route? If yes, it shows up. If not, it doesn't show up. So yeah.
Okay. So do we have any other questions? Okay, I can see one.
I will maybe give the microphone.
Okay. Okay. So the people in the audience tell us that AutoRoute and GoRouter both should support it.
Okay.
Okay.
Uh, Okay, so you talked mainly about GoRouter, and I wonder what's your opinion about like alternative solutions like AutoRoute?
So actually, I was an avid user and kind of still am of AutoRouter. I was using it back when Navigator 2.0 was just a specification somewhere in a Google Doc. So I liked it very much then. I like it with Navigator 2.0, but I tend to gravitate more toward GoRouter nowadays. I don't know exactly why, but it's perhaps because it's different when you see that a package is made and there is the name of the author, flutter.dev, as opposed to something community made. I don't know, it just, even for clients, it provides a sense of security. You can tell them that, hey, we're using this, this, and this, and they're not going to be questioning, is this not made by someone who's going to abandon it in 2 months? But personally, I know the author of AutoRouter is great, Milad Alakari. I really like that guy. So I don't have problem with using that in this sense of being afraid of it being discontinued or something. But I don't know exactly the differences between these two packages. I have not been studying them that much. I just know that from the top level perspective, they behave quite like similarly as you would expect navigation to work. They both behave in a pretty much the same way. But of course, code generation with AutoRoute is great. But at the same time, you have the GoRouter builder, which also tries to sort of address this concern of, hey, I don't want to be working with non-type safe path parameters or query parameters, and I don't want to be writing a lot of repetitive code, So yeah, with the GoRouter builder, I don't have much to ask for from GoRoute as opposed to AutoRoute.
Okay, any more questions?
Thank you for the presentation, it was great. And maybe it's not related to routing, but I would like to ask your preferences when it goes to state management.
Oh.
Yeah.
So for dependency management, it's of course Spyglass. It will be starting from tomorrow. And for state management, I tend to use qubits if there is need for something more elaborate. I use blocks from the same package, nevertheless. I don't really use much else, although in one recent project that I worked together with Tomek on this, we found out that, yeah, maybe sometimes blocks are not that great, so perhaps we would try mobx there when you need to have mutability, when it's more performant and so on. But yeah, unless there is such an edge case that, yeah, this doesn't really work out for this particular case, my primary go-to solution is block. And that's just my personal preference because I'm sort of used to that package. I really like that it has this block test package written for it as well. For example, it's not like impossible, but it's just much less of a good developer experience to be testing with I don't know, some value listenable provider or something like this than with qubits. So yeah.
Any insight maybe about Riverpod? I was really getting interested in it, and
I have not really used Riverpod with its new approach to writing its code, like with the code generation. So I use Riverpod 1.0 quite a lot, but now even on most of the commercial projects in LeanCode that I see, we use like provider, as Tomek said. But so yeah.
Okay, thanks. Any more questions?
Thanks. Hi. I wanted to ask about one of the differences maybe between AutoRoute and GoRouter, because I've been doing some apps lately with the bottom navigation bar, and this AutoRoute provides different routers, independent routers for each of the functionality of the app. And I was wondering if GoRouter provides the same.
Yeah, so there is a concept of shell routes, and it does exactly the same thing. So you can have multiple routers.
Shell routes, yes. Shell routes and nested shell routes. That's the keyword that you need to search. Okay, thanks. Any more questions? If not, then let's make another round of applause for Matej.